In the Gun, episode 134. It's time for a Mayo Bowl preview. We're all duked out, baby. We're all Christmased out here on your favorite WVU football podcast. I am Wesley Euler, flanked today by the signal caller, Jed Drenning himself. And the two of us, a little Christmas banter here, Jed, and a obviously deep dive look at the Mountaineers and the Tar Heels coming up here in just a few days. As we get started, of course, you always know this episode of In the Gun, brought to you in part by our friends at Bet Online. Jed, Merry Christmas. Good to see you. I love your sweater. If people are watching on YouTube, I've got the WVU holiday sweater here. Jed's got the... I find your lack of Christmas cheer disturbing. The Darth Vader sweater.
Exactly.
Looking good over there, partner.
Yeah, I got my Lord Vader ugly Christmas sweater game going on here. I didn't think this thing would still fit me. We wore it I think I wore it in a family Christmas picture many years ago.
You would.
I didn't know if this thing, my wife dug it out, and I wasn't sure if it would even fit, but I'm surprised it does. These things are pretty flexible. You know, that's a good thing with these cheap sweaters.
No doubt. Well, I would disagree with you. You said it's an ugly sweater. I think it's a gorgeous sweater, right? Like, I walked into the studio at work today, and everyone was like, "Oh, of course, Euler's wearing his WVU ugly sweater." I was like, "Whoa, hold on, gang. Yeah. Nothing with the flying W on it is ugly, baby. It's all beautiful."
Awesome.
So, yes,
it's awesome.
If you're listening to this podcast as you're traveling around for Christmas, from family to family, from place to place, whatever, safe travels, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. We'll get into maybe a couple of those quick hitters before we get out of here, Jed. But I am happy to see as well, too, that you've survived another National Signing Day in the books. Great stuff with you and TC, you and Tony breaking it all down as you always do. Awesome stuff. And, just for me to plug it here just for a second, our previous episode of ITG, episode 133, if you want the full breakdown of the class, our guy Jed and Skylar. I tell you what, I don't know between you and Skylar if you could find two more people more qualified to talk about and more, kind of researched and in depth with signing day every single year. So tip of the hat to both of you on another job well done.
Appreciate it. I always am eager to pull the plug and move on because I'm not one of these recruiting aficionados who tracks this 12 months a year. I mean, basically there's a 2-week window.
It's like you're cramming for a test when you do this, Jed. It's like me at midterms. You know what I mean? Me at finals.
Commiserate. Exactly. I commiserate with the staff. I can't even begin to imagine with the travel that they're subjected to and all the different things they're forced to balance with this new crazy calendar. But my window is a couple weeks. In other words, when the regular season ends, I take some time off from my day job and I kind of just dive in for a good solid couple weeks of really intense film study, evaluation, looking into. Once we whittle the list down, have a pretty good sense of who it's going to be. In other words, what I don't want to do is spend part of my year evaluating a linebacker who's going to sign with Clemson.
No doubt.
When in fact we think that. So I don't want to get into that. So once we get a sense of what's going to happen, I communicate with the staff, and then I start reaching out to the high school coaches after I do my film study. I have a chance to reach out to a lot of the high school coaches, and that part of it I look forward to. I mean, just talking football with these high school coaches, talking ball with those guys about their kids. They take great pride in them.
I know that.
And
I know
you
that
learn a
appeals
lot
to
about
the football
kids when
dork
you do
in
that.
you. Yeah.
Absolutely. And but it's a lot. It's a lot of heavy lifting for a couple weeks to kind of jam it into that 3-hour broadcast that Tony and I do for MSN. And so it makes good sense that, because Skylar's doing his own version of that with SI.
Right.
So it makes sense for us to kind of compare notes and put, an episode together. And we will. I talked to Trey Nye, our recruiting coordinator, about this. We will, when the dust settles and our lives get back to normal to some extent in January, and it makes more sense when you're more starved for content in the off season.
Sure.
We'll get Trey on the show just like we did last year. Last year we didn't have a bowl game. I mean, that was the difference. There was a void to fill because we had no bowl preview. But we'll get Trey Nyer on the show again. He and I talked about it at the show the other day at the facility.
Awesome.
And he's going to be more than happy to sit down with us and break down the class. And it's always awesome getting his insights because he's become very good at what he does. He really has. And
that's important.
The preparation that he gave me really helped. So
awesome. Yeah, we love Trey. Like you mentioned, we obviously had him on the podcast last year. I heard some of what when he joined you and Tony. I was watching the Facebook live stream as I could Saw a little bit of him on with you and Tony. Yeah, he's a wealth of knowledge. We really appreciated him coming on last year, and yeah, something for you guys to look forward to. We'll be catching up with Trey again here before too much longer. But like I said, Jed and Skylar, a great 70-80 minute breakdown that they did on the entire class. You can find that on YouTube, wherever you get the podcast. Again, like I said, that's the previous episode of In the Gun, episode 133. We are going to talk about that bowl game because we do have a bowl game here in just a second. But first, another thank you to our friends at Toothman Ford. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. They do yeoman's work in the NIL department, supporting our student athletes. So make sure you support those who support us. Big thank you to JR and Toothman Ford, as always, for presenting this podcast. All right, Jed, let's jump right into it. Real quick, speaking of Mayo, too, looking forward to this video of Ren Baker now that the Country Roads Trust has hit their goal before the bowl game. I don't know if you saw this, Jed, but Ren Baker will be taking a bath in mayonnaise as a little wager that he made with WVU fans. Great stuff by WVU fans, answering the call, answering the bell as always, and getting those Country Roads Trust numbers up. And so we will be looking forward to Ren getting his Mayo bath here, I think, before the bowl game. And then, of course, Neil Brown getting his after the bowl game. But let's talk about how the Mountaineers get there. The low-hanging fruit joke, of course, is, Jed, hey, Coach Brown is going to get a Mayo bath after the game. I guarantee it, because both head coaches are Coach Brown. You see what I did there? Neil Brown and Mac Brown, of course. But this one, it feels like, listen, this could be arguably the juiciest quarterback matchup in all the bowl games if Drake May were going to play. We know that he is not. He's on his way to being I think for sure, top 5 pick, certainly top 10 in the NFL draft in a few months. He will not play the talented signal caller for the Tar Heels. So, Jed, I want to leave this up to you. You know, I normally like to do this when we do our game previews because you're so well researched and prepared for these things. What's kind of the biggest thing to keep an eye on? What's the 5-star matchup that we're looking for? You know, when you're breaking down this game, where do you think it begins?
A lot of interesting storylines with the way this is played out. First of all, who saw this coming? I mean, we spent the weeks leading up to the end of the regular season with all the bowl projections looking at, of course, the bowls directly affiliated with the Big 12 and wondering which of those West Virginia might land in. And as it turns out, it's a bowl that's not directly affiliated with the Big 12. So the Mayo Bowl was obviously happy to get its hands on West Virginia because we're going to turn out in big numbers in Charlotte. I have zero doubt about that. And to get North Carolina nearby as well, it's a great matchup for them. So the Duke's Mayo Bowl has to be incredibly excited about this opportunity, the way things have landed. And it's a battle between two quality teams that both stand at 8-4. Now, the paths we took to get there, as you arrange your Duke's Mayo on your desk, there, mine's in my fridge upstairs. I've been eating it for a couple weeks. I made it a point. Yep, I was at Kroger in Morgantown at the Gucci Kroger, and I picked some up. But so those in Morgantown, if you know, you know, right?
You know the Gucci Kroger,
the Gucci Kroger. But yeah, two teams that landed at 8-4, different paths in getting there, right? North Carolina at one point was 6-0, ranked in the top 10. And much like last year, Wes, I mean, last year they were at 9-1, pushing the top 10,
right.
and the wheels kind of came off and some things went against them. And this year it was a similar story, but they landed at 8-4, as did West Virginia. And I think what we have to do, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the opt-outs or the injuries, because especially on the offensive side of the ball for North Carolina, we're going to talk about their numbers at large and the production that they've had under offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey, which that's probably a good starting point. I think it's interesting. Finally, we get a bowl game against Chip Lindsey, and what I mean by finally, the Cactus Bowl. I remember one of the storylines in the Cactus Bowl was Arizona State had literally just hired Chip Lindsey because they had an outgoing offensive coordinator. And there was actually some chatter. Chip Lindsey, is he going to arrive fresh on campus and have his hands on the game plan against West Virginia in the Cactus Bowl? Of course, that didn't happen, even though he was technically on staff for the Arizona State team that we beat in the Cactus Bowl. So here we face Chip Lindsey, who's been at North Carolina for a year, and he's done a good job. He was brought in to replace Phil Longo, who moved, very coveted offensive coordinator on Mac Brown's staff, who moved in the offseason to take the OC job at Wisconsin. And what Mac Brown hoped to do with the pieces that he had in place. Of course, he had, you mentioned Drake May, and he had a lot of bells and whistles and fun toys on the perimeter, a lot of offensive skill. He said, we want to maintain what we have going for us in the pass game, but we want to become much more formidable in the run game. Because they were a middling team running the football last year, as dynamic as they were throwing it. Well, mission accomplished, because North Carolina this year ran for 200 yards a game, give or take, threw for 300 yards a game, give or take. So they were burning the candle from both ends and very effectively doing so. But again, that was with Drake May. So let's talk about some of the changes. I want to go through, when you look at the number of kids that Carolina has in the portal, it's significant. But some of their kids, they have a couple kids, West, that are in the portal that are actually going to participate in the bowl game. So let's talk about the opt-outs and the injuries and the impact that that's had. I'll just talk about it on both sides of the ball, and we'll get it out of the way at the top. So North Carolina's opt-outs include 7 starters, either by opt-out or by injury. Okay. Starting obvious with Drake May, as you touched on, definitely top 5, certainly top 10. I think maybe a top 2 pick, right?
No doubt.
In the NFL draft. Some
Hey,
people are saying
Jed,
number 1.
he could like that would not surprise me. I still think it probably ends up being Caleb Williams, but that would not
Yeah.
surprise me.
Which we said before, a year ago, that would have sounded like blasphemy to suggest that anything other than Caleb Williams could be number 1 overall. But Drake May's kind of starting to make the case, or has made the case. So Drake May opting out. So we're going to get to his replacement and what that'll look like and what we might expect. Tez Walker, their leading receiver, who was a transfer, who was very productive for them this year, 41 catches for almost 700 yards, 7 touchdowns. He was a real productive player for him this year. Kobe Paysor won't be playing in the game. Another productive wideout for them, had 22 catches. What I think is interesting is Corey Gaynor, their center, who for the last couple of years has really been the anchor of that offensive line. He had over 900 snaps, which was on the most on the entire offensive line. He's a very consistent football player in both the pass and the run game. And he's been the vocal leader of that offensive line. So the thing you got to wonder about, they're going to do some shuffling on the interior of the line, but the thing you got to wonder about is communication. Same type of thing West Virginia is dealing with without Zach Frazier. We got Brandon Yates sliding in there for different reasons, right? So both sides will have communication tested at the point of attack. Corey Gaynor, the center for North Carolina. Now, here's where the plot really starts to thicken. Yes, you have Zach Rice out. He's kind of a sub on the offensive line. He's injured, but they have their tight end room, Wes. And this is where the plot really starts to thicken, if you ask me. John Copenhaver, injury. He's out. Very productive tight end, had 18 catches, 279 yards, 4 touchdowns. Big part of their ground game as a blocker. Bryson Nesbitt, I should say, another tight end, also injured. Caught 41 balls for almost 600 yards and 5 scores. Wes, they're going to be without a scholarship tight end in this bowl game. And here's why I think that's interesting. It's not like they're a big 10 personnel team. They haven't been. They've been a big 12 personnel and sometimes even 13 personnel team. That, of course, means 1 back, 2 tight ends, 1 back, sometimes 3 tight ends. So I do think that is going to have a significant impact on how they approach things philosophically in this football game. They're going to have to get pretty creative with some other body types filling some of those roles. So we'll double back to that when we talk about their offense. Cedric Gray at linebacker, easily, I think, their most significant defender, 267 tackles the last 2 years, leads all of Power 5. He's going to the NFL. He's out. So right there as a creature of the box, a downhill defender, very good against the run. He is out. So Cedric Gray, and we'll talk about what they're going to try and do to replace him. Elijah Huzzy, 727 snaps on the back end at corner. He's going to be out. Defensive back Will Hardy played quite a bit on the back end for them. He will be out. DJ Hardy, another defensive back, in the portal, but will play. As will their backup quarterback for this game, Jefferson Boaz, a big 6'7" kid. He's in the portal, but he will play. So I thought that it was incumbent upon us to, before we get into anything else, you have to first start talking about the absences on their roster because they seem pretty significant.
I mean, that's
right?
significant, without a doubt. I love that stat of no scholarship tight end.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of their perimeter playmakers as well too. Their signal caller, their heart of their defense. I mean, those are some significant absences as you laid out there.
They absolutely are. Now, let's rehash how productive they've been from an offensive standpoint with the pieces they had in place, and then we'll transition into what they don't have in place and what they're going to try and do about it. Offensively, they were first in the ACC with 500 yards a game. Incredibly productive. 37 points a game, second in the ACC. Pass offense with Drake May, 307 yards a game, good for first in the ACC, and also tied for first in the ACC with 197 yards a game on the ground. So I think that's very intriguing. Again, Chip Lindsey did a great job. I have to give a shout out to my guy, Freddie Kitchens, who I was on staff with at Glenville State. He was our running back coach when I was the OC. We lived together. Freddie, of course, the former head coach of the Cleveland Browns, bounced around the NFL with several jobs. He's now on staff at North Carolina with Mac Brown as the run game coordinator. And Freddie does a good job. But as is Lonnie Galloway, former Mountaineer wideouts coach. They got a very talented offensive staff. And we'll get back to Randy Clements, their offensive line coach, and the bearing that may or may not have on how they game plan against West Virginia. A little teaser alert there. But when you look at their offense, everything is going to be built around Drake May out of the equation. Omarion Hampton, their feature back, he's their bell cow. He led the ACC with 1,442 rush yards. That was good for number 4 in the country. That's the most by a Tar Heel since Elijah Hood way back in 2015. So Hampton has been a consistently productive feature of this offense. And you have to figure with Drake May out and Connor Harrell, the dual threat freshman recruit in, who's had limited snaps this year, they're going to lean on the run game with Omarion Hampton. You got to figure that's going to happen. But again, how tricky will that get without those tight ends as part of the equation? Hampton leads all FBS runners with 1,023 yards after contact. And that's one of the things when you watch this kid on tape, it really stands out how physical he is. He's tough to bring down, 8th in the country in broken tackles with 33. It's not, yeah, he's a little shifty and he's a little slippery, but that's not his forte. His forte is he will plow through you. He's just physically imposing and runs hard. He runs angry. He's tough to get to the ground. So you better get a lot of hash to the football. Don't give up on the play to the whistle, and get as many defenders to him as you possibly can. So the question becomes, how will, in fact, they feature him? I mean, he's going to get his touches. There's no doubt about it. But is it going to be as obvious as just a downhill run game from Omarion Hampton, setting up some max protect play action opportunities for the young quarterback Connor Harrell?
Sure.
When I watched Connor Harrell, the games that he played most significantly, he got to play some against Syracuse. He got to play some of the blowout against Campbell. And he had a stretch against Campbell West. I think it was like 3 plays in a row where he made a very athletic play in the throw game. As he was absorbing a hit, made a great throw. And then he made an incredibly athletic play in the run game, 40-some-odd yard touchdown by making guys miss. And the next thing you know, 60-yard touchdown pass, 3 consecutive plays. So when he gets heated up, he's a handful. I mean, the skill set is there. There's a reason that he was as highly recruited out of the state of Alabama as he was. So he's a handful. So you can get creative. Now, let's start to wonder. Let's put these pieces together. Chip Lindsey as an offensive play caller has bounced around. He's a Gus Malzahn guy. Okay. Most recently, last year was at UCF, and his play caller at UCF was JRP, John Reese Plumley. Okay. Another athletic dual threat type guy. Well, he wasn't afraid. 150 some odd times, Plumlee ran the football at UCF last year under the tutelage of Chip Lindsey, who was directing traffic and calling plays. So even when you saw Connor Harrell in the game late in these blowouts, you did see Chip Lindsey using him in the called quarterback run game. So I would certainly expect that to be a dimension of what we're going to see. Now, we talked about their leading receiver being out, but they have some other talented kids on the perimeter that will participate, including J.J. Jones, son of former Mountaineer John Jones. So they have some kids on the perimeter that can make plays, including a slot receiver who had 15 grabs early in the season against Minnesota. So it's not as though they're without talent in that receiver room. So there's some creative things they can do. Now you got to ask yourself, how do they address the absence of those tight ends? Do they find some fullback body types, move into H-back types? You're going to obviously have to run the football, but then if you, under ordinary circumstances, you say run the football, max protect with 8-man protections, simplify routes, and push the football vertical to those playmakers and make life easy for Connor Harrell. But you don't have your tight ends. So that's where the question comes into play. I would almost even expect maybe some different personnel sets, a little more two-back. Uh, we talked earlier that they've been a Big 12 personnel, 2 tight ends, and sometimes even 13 personnel, 3 tight ends team. That's not going to be the case in this football game. So now let's talk about Randy Clements. Randy Clements, a very well-respected and well-established offensive line coach. And I think it's an interesting wrinkle that he's on this North Carolina staff for this reason. Let's think about this. So because the regular season ended and they are fundamentally transformed as an offense from a personnel standpoint. Drake May's gone, the tight ends are gone, your center's gone. So you're going to have to reinvent some of what you do offensively by hook or by crook, one way or the other. Well, for those listening or watching, do you remember back in the 2015 Russell Bowl? You had a situation where Baylor was facing, ironically enough, North Carolina. I remember we were actually in a bowl game and I was watching this up in the press box during our pregame. Well, Randy Clements was on staff for that Baylor football team with Art Briles. Now, I don't know if y'all remember, but what Baylor did, Art Briles revisited and doubled back to his high school pedigree and his high school background. And they went from a pitch and catch air raid team. And that's exactly what Chip Lindsey's background is. He has an air raid background, but with the Malzahn wrinkles. So in that particular bowl game, Baylor had their quarterbacks out because of injury. They were missing some wideouts because of injury. So they couldn't be this top heavy, pass heavy team that had carried the day for them offensively throughout the course of the year when they were one of the better offenses in all of college football. So you start to see some parallels here. North Carolina has been one of the better offenses in all of college football all season, just like Baylor was in 2015. Well, what did Baylor do? Baylor actually got so creative with their personnel, they ended up playing some receivers at quarterback. And they doubled back to what Briles did back in his high school days in Texas and started going option heavy offensive football. They ran 84 times against North Carolina, ambushed them for 645 rushing yards. North Carolina had no answers. It kind of reminded me in watching that game, Wes, of course, it's become legendary what West Virginia did in 1969 in their bowl game, installing the wishbone with Jim Carlin to do kind of the same thing to a bowl win in 1969. Well, again, Randy Clements, the offensive line coach at North Carolina, was on staff when Baylor did that, completely reinvented themselves offensively in the span of about 3 weeks. Now, what he had to do to find the athleticism behind center that he needed to do that, what Baylor had to do was put receivers at quarterback. Well, in this instance, North Carolina is at least not going to have to do that because Connor Harrell is that skill set to begin with. Their backup quarterback, Connor Harrell, can already run like a scalded dog. So you can afford to get creative. Now, I'm not suggesting Carolinas can come out and run the ball 84 times, but who knows what you might expect, especially without these tight ends as part of the equation, because you're going to have to do it with some 10 personnel. So do you start running empty sets with more motion? Is that how you address this? And you stress the perimeter, maybe with some option components, with some slot motion? I don't know. I'm just thinking as a former play caller, without my tight ends, with the personnel that you're being handed, how do you play to your strengths with Amarion Hampton as the bell cow, as the feature player in your offense? What exactly might you hope to do? So I find that intriguing. I find that compelling. And the fact that North Carolina has been a tempo offense, again, with Drake May. I mean, this is an offense that's averaged 74 snaps a game. That's second most in the ACC. So maybe what you need to do is give West Virginia a dose of its own medicine. West Virginia is an offense that likes to play keep away, likes to play ball control, likes to limit its snaps defensively. and win the time of possession battle. So is that what we see out of North Carolina? Maybe. Again, something to consider. But the North Carolina offense, as dynamic and as explosive as it's been, they average 7.8 yards per play. That's the second highest among all offenses that West Virginia has faced. It's I don't know, but that's not the same offense that West Virginia is about to face. Now, North Carolina, and this is where it gets interesting, was 2-4 when converting less than half of their third downs in the 2022 season, tied for 36th worst in the FBS, and they didn't get much better this year. It's so difficult to forecast what's going to happen without Drake May. I mean, that's where we find ourselves, right? So, finally, in closing, the last thing we can talk about is when you look at West Virginia defensively, with a defense that's led by Beanie Bishop, recently anointed consensus All-American, freshly minted consensus All-American Beanie Bishop, who does still need a couple, passes defended, pass breakups to break the school record. Let's look at third down situations. West Virginia has forced the opposition 52% of the time into third and long. When they get them into the third and long, they're pretty productive, obviously, holding them at 26%. Overall, West Virginia is fifth in the Big 12 in third down defense, allowing a conversion rate of 38%. The way I typically look and break this down is I want to see how often from each yardage metric the opposition is placed into that metric. So when you look at third and short, third and 1 to 3 yards, 45% of the time. 1 to 3 yards is 24% of the time. West Virginia has faced offenses that 24% of the time find themselves in third and 1 to 3 yards, and they've given up almost half those conversions. So what this is going to come down to, we'll flip this and go to the other side of the ball, but what this is going to get down to is how often can West Virginia force a team that I'm convinced is going to run it more than they have already throughout the course of the season into some third and longs, because I do believe if you can force Connor Harrell into some third and long situations, you can potentially force him into some mistakes and give him some looks he's probably not expecting. But how often are you going to be able to do that against one of the most dynamic and consistent and physical backs in the country? But he doesn't have his tight ends, but he doesn't have his center. So there's a lot to kind of project, forecast, a lot of guesswork. So, when we did the recruiting show the other day, we had a chance to talk to a couple of members of the defensive staff, and they said, look, we kind of got a hunch of what we think we might expect from them offensively. And I would have to think it's some version of what we said earlier. Run the football, try and do what you can to get creative and max protect and take some shots downfield to make life easy for Connor Harrell. But I also think you're probably going to want to go empty. You're probably going to run some 10 personnel sets without those tight ends and get the football out of Connor Harrell's hands as quickly as possible with easy reads to let him be decisive and build some confidence. But the wrinkle, West, to me, that makes this most interesting is no scholarship tight ends for a team that's so heavy on 12 personnel.
It's crazy.
It makes it very interesting. There's a lot of guesswork involved.
No, I mean, there absolutely is. Not only for us, but I'm sure for them as well too, as they've been trying to patch this thing together over the last couple of weeks. That's a tall task for any offense, but like you mentioned, one that likes to run 12 personnel, sometimes even 13 personnel as much as they do. That's going to loom large, without a doubt. Jed, what do you say we take a break here, get to our break of the show, and then we will, on the other side, put a bow on this thing. Final thoughts on the Mayo Bowl, final thoughts on Christmas, all that good stuff. Sound good to you?
Works for me. Let's talk the other side of the football and wish everybody a happy holidays and move on, right?
That's it, and we will do that in just a minute. You are in the gun.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
For more West Virginia Mountaineer football content, be sure to follow us on Twitter at In the Gun Podcast.
For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed.
If you work the land, you just got to be a jack of all trades type. There's just too much to do. So if you got to be a welder or a farmer or a ditch digger, that's just who you are that day. Then tomorrow, you can be somebody else.
Get your Coyote at the new location of Johnston Equipment between Weston and Buchanan.
Back in the gun here. And it is time to look at the other side of the football as we continue this Mayo Bowl preview. But before we do that, another thank you to our friends at Fortis. Shout out to our guy, Rick Lewis, for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. Make sure you're visiting fortis.us.com. All right, Jed, we know it's the Mountaineers. It's the Tar Heels, 5:30 on December 27th. Let's spin that block and get to the other side of things here. What you got?
Well, let's look at North Carolina on the defensive side of the football under defensive coordinator Gene Chizik, traditional even front defensive play caller. He's bounced around in some high-profile spots. I mean, a lot of people remember the success he had at Auburn with that unbeaten season as the defensive coordinator in 2004 with Tuberville. He was actually the defensive coordinator on staff with Mac. They have a lot of history together back when they beat USC in that famous Rose Bowl game to win the national championship. He ended up being the head coach at both Iowa State and Auburn, but didn't have a tremendous amount of success, kind of a 500 career as a head coach. But Mac Brown thought he might be the answer for a defense that had ailed them. And he brought him in last year, and it didn't really work out. And so they were hoping over the course of the offseason to rectify some of the issues they had and some of the leakage they had last year. And it didn't shape up that way. For all the success they've had on the offensive side of the football, they've struggled on the defensive side of the football. When you look at, again, we talked about some of the moving parts, some of the pieces that won't be in place, including their leading tackler because he's off to the NFL. Total defense, they're 12th in the ACC, allowing over 400 yards a game. Scoring defense, they're 9th in the ACC, so almost middle of the pack. Rushing defense, they're 11th, giving up 163 a game. But defensively, on the back end is where they've struggled. 14th in the ACC, dead last in pass defense. So they've really struggled there. Now, from a rhythm standpoint, they let opposing offenses find their rhythm. We always talk about those 10-plus yard plays, Wes, as being rhythm-based plays. Well, they've allowed the most 10-plus yard plays in the entire ACC. So they've struggled to knock opposing offenses off rhythm. That's kind of what this comes down to. And West Virginia has made a living throughout the course of the season, playing time of possession, playing keep away, protecting its own defense. But later in the season, we started finding some pop, and we started finding some rhythm and some big playability. So for a West Virginia offense that is going to be without C.J. Donaldson, and we're going to lean in large measure. When you look at the run game, Jaheim will get the start, but you're also going to get a lot of reps out of DJ Oliver. I think fans will be excited to see him. Jalen Anderson's going to be part of the equation. But the straw that started to drink for West Virginia the last half of the season offensively has obviously been Garrett. Garrett is starting to find his stride as both a runner and a passer. Now, North Carolina get into some interesting trends here. They opened the season, ironically enough, in the Dukes Mayo Kickoff Classic in Charlotte, same stadium, against South Carolina, against Spencer Rattler in South Carolina, and looked pretty good in doing so. I mean, defensively, they came out and they were playing lights out. They had 9 sacks in that opener. They looked like the '85 Bears against Spencer Rattler. 9 sacks in that opener. Held South Carolina to a field goal in the second half, won decisively. That was an impressive win. Again, that kind of set the tone for this 6-0 start that saw them land or climb into the top 10 that we talked about. But some things have happened to them since that game that they haven't been able to overcome. In fact, they had 9 sacks in that game, but only 13 sacks in the 10 games versus FBS opponents since then. So they've been unable to get to or even impact opposing quarterbacks. And for a West Virginia team that wants to first and foremost run the football, you kind of got to wonder what this is going to look like. Now, we talked about those 10-plus yard plays, right? And how they're rhythm based. Now, how does the peg fit into the hole? Well, look at West Virginia and what we're trying to do with a combination of both our zone schemes and our gap schemes. We become, you've heard Owen and I talk about it all the live long day, how effective we become with that stretch play. And now with you have that dual threat quarterback in Garrett that can read that backside defender and make you pay if you overplay it. Well, you're facing a defense that has struggled to knock teams off rhythm because it's giving up so many 10-yard plays. So as an offense, you want to find your rhythm. Well, West Virginia, let's look at some rushing numbers. West Virginia, Garrett Green has run the football 111 times. 28 of those have been for 10-plus yards. So basically, once every 4 times Garrett runs the football, it's a first down. Okay? It's a 10-plus yard game. Jaheim White has run the football 97 times. 27 of those have been for 10-plus yards.
Wow.
So facing a defense that allows more 10-plus yards than any defense in the ACC, and that was with its leading tackler, West Virginia has had success in getting those types of rhythm-based chunk plays, mini chunk plays, MINI by many, right? But, as a team, West Virginia, 90-plus plays on the ground of 535, or excuse me, 10-plus yards.
No, that's a good. You can take. Listen, if you need to take a second there, you need a cough. You all right there? You okay?
I was fighting a cough there, wasn't
Your
I?
face is getting red on the broadcast. I can't lose you in the middle of this, Jed.
Yeah, I have my fisherman's friend out, and they're working overtime right now. But and I'll close with this portion with this. Garrett Green, 44% of his runs, and this is a Sports Info Solutions metric. 44% of Garrett's runs have resulted in a first down. That's number 1 among all P5 rushers.
That's crazy.
That's number 1. So the production has been there. All right. Now, teams have really made hay against North Carolina throwing the football. If you go back and track the last 2 years under Gene Chizik, North Carolina, when they don't allow you to throw the football defensively, that's when they have success. 7 times in the last 2 years under Gene Chizik, they've held the opposition under 200 yards passing. And in those 7 games, they're 6-1.
Yeah.
That's when they've had success.
Huh.
So it's incumbent upon West Virginia to, yes, run the football, but bring a balanced enough attack that you can consistently enough throw the football to kind of exert your will on North Carolina from both ends. And that's how you can get into those 10-plus yards rhythm-based plays. Now, let's get a little more granular about this, okay? We talked about Gene Chizik traditionally being an even front guy, all right? He is an even front guy, and he plays a lot of man-free coverage behind it. He'll pick his spots and take his shots and see what he can do from a pressure standpoint, but a lot of 4-man rushes. In fact, North Carolina has allowed the most passing yards in the ACC out of a 4-man rush configuration. So you're going to have your opportunities when he's bringing just those 4, right? Because here's what's going to matter. When they start bringing more than 4, when they start dialing up some man coverage, we talked earlier about since that opener against South Carolina, they've struggled to pressure opposing passers. They have 27 sacks all year. Well, 9 of them came in that opener. All right. Well, of those 27 sacks, here's what you got to watch out for. If they run a 4-man pressure or a 4-man pass rush and stay base, okay, they've given up a ton of yards. But when they start dialing up some pressure packages and run man-free coverage behind it, my man-free, we call that cover one. That's basically a free safety parked high. You're splattered man coverage across, and that means you're probably going to be bringing some element of pressure. They actually lead the ACC in sack rate when going cover one at 15.6%. So that's their most effective look defensively when trying to pressure you. So you got to make hay when they only bring a 4-man pressure, because they're going to find more effective ways to get to you. 15 of their 27 sacks, they only have 27, but 15 of them have come from man-free cover one looks, which is the most in the ACC. So be ready for that. They will give you some opportunities to make some plays. A lot of times, Wes, when you see man-free coverage, you're going to convert to different routes. And the man-beating routes oftentimes either break quickly out or break quickly in, depending on the leverage that you're going to see from the defensive backs. So let's say, for instance, that you have a man beater that's a slant configuration. All right. First, can our wideouts be good enough technicians on the perimeter to get a free release and get that inside leverage? Because in man coverage, they don't want to give that up. So if you can battle to win the inside leverage portion of that route, you're going to have some success against these guys, because when you look at what's happened when teams do successfully run those slant routes against them, they've allowed over 300 yards, which is the most in the ACC on that particular route, and they've allowed 5 touchdown passes. So when they go man free, that's when they have the most success impacting the opposing passer. But they're going to give you some opportunities, if you're a good enough technician on the perimeter, to break free with a clean release on those inside breaking, quick cutting routes. So the man beater type route. So Garrett will be alert to that. The wideouts will be alert to that. Something to keep an eye on. And now when North Carolina defensively, here's something else that's interesting. They're the only team in the ACC to not allow an opposing running back to catch a touchdown pass. Now, what that speaks to is their effectiveness from the linebacking core and the nickelbacks. So for a West Virginia offense, we've seen the game-breaking ability of Jaheim White in the pass game. I mean, think of the Cincinnati game, the game-breaking 75-yarder. Think of the game winner against Baylor. So it's something to keep an eye on once we get down into the red zone. They've done a good job of bottling that up. But again, this is without their maestro, without their leading tackler, who was also pretty good in coverage. That Gray kid's also pretty good in coverage. So something to keep an eye on there, especially when we get down to the red zone. Now, if you want to look at areas that they have improved, and even if it's minor strides, they've taken a couple strides since last year. From a takeaway standpoint, they're more opportunistic. Last year, they only forced 14 turnovers. This year, they're a little more grabby. They have 21 takeaways. So ball security will matter. They will have the ability, or they have had the ability, to steal a possession now and then and help the offense out. So high alert for a West Virginia offense that's done a good job protecting the football. Knock on wood, continue to do that. And then from a TFL standpoint, at least when they're picking their spots from a run blitz perspective, last year, they're not an incredibly disruptive defense, as we talked about, but at least against the run game, more so than last year. Last year, they were only managing about 3.5 TFLs a game, so not often knocking you off script. This year, it's up to almost 6. Still only 10th in the ACC, but they've at least made some progress there. But this isn't the type of defense that's going to force you into a ton of third and longs. If you break it down, we faced some defenses earlier in the year, West, that will force you into 3rd and 7 or longer 60+% of the time, right? That's a tough way to make a living. That's not the case with this defense. North Carolina defensively, one of the reasons they've struggled, when I break down the metrics on 3rd down, do you know how often they force you into 3rd and 7 or longer? Only 42% of the time. So by and large, you're going to live ahead of the sticks. 27% of the time, it's going to be 3rd and 1 to 3 yards. And then from a 3rd and intermediate standpoint, you're looking about 1.25 times. So more than half the time, it's going to be intermediate or better. And only 42% of the time is it truly 3rd and long. So that's one of the reasons that they've struggled. Now West Virginia has started to turn a corner with some of these third down conversion metrics. We at least climbed to the point where we're seventh in the Big 12 because early in the year we were really struggling to move the chains. So a bowl game, all bets are off, and it might be a 4-down proposition anyway. But if West Virginia can play into what North Carolina has allowed other offenses to do, stay ahead of schedule, create some manageable third downs, and then maybe even roll the dice a couple times on fourth down, I think that will serve us incredibly well. But finally, when you look at small ball situationally, let's look at it from a red zone standpoint. North Carolina defensively, from a touchdown allowed in the red zone standpoint, they're middle of the pack in the ACC. So it all depends what you make of it. West Virginia earlier in the year was more effective, but we ended sixth in the Big 12 from a touchdown scoring rate standpoint in the red zone. That's I don't look at red zone scoring. I only look at touchdown rate in the red zone. That's what matters to me. And then from a third, that's kind of an even fight from a third down standpoint. We talked about the numbers at large, but they're middle of the pack overall, eighth in the ACC. We're seventh in the Big 12. But I think the key there is can we stay ahead of schedule? Can we stay ahead of the sticks and play into some of what they've allowed some of these other offenses to do by running the football, finding our rhythm with those 10-plus yard plays. And the next thing you know, you pop a couple of those 10-plus yard plays, you can take a shot downfield and you got a big play and a splash play, maybe even a cheap score. So that's what I see.
Well, I tell you what, after what you just laid down there, I know, listen, I'll preface this by saying I feel like this is a lot of times a cliched thing to bring up because, of course, every team and every game wants a fast start, and how you start the game is always important for how the first 15 minutes are kind of the first chapter of how the next 45 are going to play out. But it feels like a fast start for WVU, and this one would go a long way. A offense and a defense that's missing some key pieces that, like you mentioned, probably wants to slow this thing down a little bit and lean on the run game and try and keep it close and limit plays and possessions and things like that. It feels like this would not be a team that would be built to be playing down 10 points, down 14 points, something like that.
I agree with that. And again, North Carolina, West Virginia to some extent, the Zach Frazier injury, and there's a couple other situations we've talked about. But North Carolina is going to be forced from a personnel standpoint to make some adjustments. A big one to me is the absence of Cedric Gray because he's off to the NFL. So he's opting out as their leading tackler and the leading tackler among all P5 defenders the last 2 years. What they're going to do is they have another battle tested veteran in Power Eccles. He's going to slide into Cedric Gray's spot. And then Amari Campbell is going to slide from a linebacker standpoint in a Power Eccles spot. So they're trying to make some adjustments there, but they have some guys down on the back end. They have their leading tackler out among their linebacking core. So they're going to have to make some adjustments. I am curious as to how that might impact what he does or doesn't do from a rolling the dice standpoint. We talked about how critical his, cover one man free blitz opportunities are. I don't know. Are we going to see more quarters coverage, more cover three out of him? I don't know the answer to that. It depends how much faith they have talked about. They've recruited well. For the fifth straight time, they have a top 25 recruiting class. So it's not like they don't have some untested talent and reserved spots. So the cupboard's not there. And you heard Neil talk about it, Wes. Yes, they're going to have to play some youth, but to some extent, there's a silver lining for North Carolina to be found in that because bowl season is all about who's most excited to be there. Sure. And you got to figure if you're some of these starters like Drake May, if you were 6-0 in the top 10, how excited are you to play in the Duke's Mayo Bowl at 8-4? But if you're an untested freshman, you're really excited. I mean, Connor Harrell's making his first career start at quarterback. He's tremendously excited. So there's something to be said for that. Which team will be the most excited? I do fully expect West Virginia to come out fired up, seeing the opportunity that this is, and I expect our fans to turn out and help us. So there's, as we said, there's a lot of storylines here. It makes this for a compelling matchup for a host of reasons. A lot of question marks. I wonder how they're going to handle things from a game planning perspective offensively. I wonder how they're going to handle things, whether or not they roll the dice and gamble as much defensively with Chiswick, with some of these guys. I don't know. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, I tell you what, I'm excited. I know Mountaineer Nation's excited. You mentioned that game in Charlotte being ideal for the Mayo Bowl. I think they opened up more tickets for sale on the WVU side of the stadium because there was such a demand. So should be a fun atmosphere, opportunity to get to a 9th win, right? I mean, a number that we haven't hit, since 2016 when Dana's team went 10-2 in the regular season, 10-3 overall. So opportunity for young players, like you mentioned, opportunity to really listen. This team's going to carry momentum into next season, but this I think would really put a stamp on that.
Yeah,
and it's a big one.
Last thing I would add, Wes, Mac Brown is a very well-established, well-respected coach for a long list of reasons. He has 5 bowl wins, which is more than any head coach in North Carolina history. He has a national championship at Texas, so you can't question his pedigree. He's been there and done that. One of the small things that I would say pay attention to, and again, from a forecasting standpoint, because you're inserting so much youth into the lineup for North Carolina. North Carolina was already the most penalized team in the ACC at 67 yards a game, and that was with their veterans. What impact does inserting these freshmen or these younger players have on that? Does that help that or hurt that? I mean, running fewer snaps, you would expect. Does that help? I don't know. But if you can take that, they've struggled from a discipline standpoint, avoiding penalties. So if you can use that, even a false start, all of a sudden a 2nd and 7 becoming a 2nd and 12 with a young quarterback really helps West Virginia defensively. So if you can start stacking penalties, and if we can avoid penalties and let them hurt themselves and shoot themselves in the foot as the most penalized team in the ACC, it's little things like that that tend to add up. And I'm going to make a prediction here, Wes. I've seen it posted sometime in the last couple of weeks. West Virginia has never had a football game end with the final score 28-21. I'm going to say this will be the first. West Virginia wins this 28-21.
Ooh, I think that might be the first time in the 134 episode history of this historic podcast that is also your new favorite WVU podcast, even though we're wrapping up year 2 here. I don't know if you've ever made a specific score prediction before. I like that from you, Babe Ruth, calling your shot there. You're pointing to the outfield and calling your shot.
Yeah.
That is interesting because that's a pretty common score, right? 4 touchdowns against 3 touchdowns, 28-21.
Never happened.
Jed calling a little scoreagami. I absolutely love it.
I think there's a WVU scoreagami account.
There is.
I think that's where I saw that. That posted that's never been a score. So
well, I'll tell you what, if it ends up happening, we'll go back, we'll cut up this part of the podcast here, and we'll tweet it at those guys, and maybe we'll have some fun back and forth with WVU scoreagami. And that would also kind of play, the spread right now, WVU is favored by 6.5 points. So 7-point victory. You're right.
Yeah,
you're right in range there, dear signal caller. A final thank you to our new friends at Johnson Equipment. Make sure you're visiting their new location, Route 33, right outside of Weston. Big thanks to Johnson Equipment for joining the party here.
Right outside of Weston. I just saw Tim Johnston a couple days ago, and we wished each other happy holidays. So
I love it. I love it. All right, Jed, as we wrap this up, before we go, a couple quick hitters Christmas for you, okay?
Yes,
the people needs to know favorite Christmas movie.
Well, I tell you what, that is a tough one. I just recently, 2 nights ago, watched for the 1,000th time It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a great
one. Without getting way out into the weeds, there is a festival in Seneca Falls, New York. I don't know if I ever told you about this. Seneca Falls claims for a million reasons Bedford Falls in the movie is based on Seneca Falls. It's up in the Finger Lakes of New York.
Yep.
It's a really quaint, cool town. They have a festival. This movie was first released on December 15th, 1946. I know that it's because it's the day my dad was born. So he just had his birthday.
That's cool. That's cool.
So the weekend closest to December 15th, they always have their It's a Wonderful Festival. We went up to it in 2014, and it was flat out awesome.
That's cool.
It's tough to beat It's a Wonderful Life, but at the same time, it's tough to beat a Christmas Story, which plays all day every Christmas now on TBS and TNT. And then for that matter, I'll tell you the one that's the most recent classic, and that is Elf. I mean, Elf's only been around for a couple decades, but it's absolutely an entrenched classic now, right?
And I know you love Will
There's
Ferrell,
a lot of good
too.
ones, but those are the ones I give shout outs to.
Those are good. My wife would like that. My wife would say Home Alone or Elf, so she would be on board with you. Listen, I mean, the answer's Die Hard, right? We all know that. But I think Jed and I are going more. I think Jed and I are going more in the vein of classic Christmas movies. Um, I think Christmas Vacation deserves a shout along with those that you said, but mine would be The Grinch, and specifically the Jim Carrey Grinch. Jim Carrey was my favorite actor growing up. Like I think I've told you this before. Like I grew up on the Ace Ventura movies. I wore those two VHSs out, both of them, When Nature Calls and Pet Detective. So I loved Jim Carrey growing up, and that Grinch movie with Jim Carrey came out when I was like 9 or 10 years old, like right at that perfect Christmas age. So that's always, that one hits me right in the nostalgia every time. If that's on, I'm sitting down and watching it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Christmas song, Jed.
Silent Night.
That's a great
First
one.
performed in Christmas on Christmas Eve 1818. It's Silent Night. It just gives me the chills.
It's a great one. There's something about doing Silent Night at church on Christmas Eve when everybody's holding the candle. You're right. It gives you the chills every single time. I'm gonna go with Run Run Rudolph by Chuck Berry is my favorite. But man, really anything by Andy Williams or Nat King Cole, or Gene Autry, like any of those classic Christmases.
I got to insert my favorite Chuck Berry song, "Brown Eyed Handsome Man." But go ahead.
There you go. I love me some Chuck Berry. I do. Favorite Christmas tradition?
Ooh, that's a very good one. A lot of times what we've done is, and it depends. It's sometimes 4 weeks, sometimes 6 weeks before Christmas. We buy different versions of hot cocoa, and once a week.
I like where this is going.
Once a week, as a family, and we haven't been as compliant with it this year, but as a family, once a week. Excuse me, Fisherman's Friend, kick in, please. We'll have the hot cocoa leading up to Christmas all the way. We'll map it out from Christmas Eve and backdate it, and you get like a variety pack of like 4 or 5 or 6 different kinds. Now, Mav, my young guy, and I, we're the only ones in the family because Dylan and Chrissy are not fans of any kind of peppermint and chocolate, but we love it. So we can count them out for that one. But yeah, all the other different flavors of hot cocoa, that's been a fun tradition of ours. And historically, I always read the kids. Twas the night before Christmas, on Christmas Eve, as they go to bed, as we're finalizing things with the presents out under the tree and everything. And then and this has become more fun through the years. Yes, with Dylan, it was fun when he was younger, but he's older now. But the technology wasn't quite to the point that it was then. But the NORAD tracking Santa stuff on Christmas Eve, it was at least to the point where he and I could enjoy it together when he was a kid. But now Mav and I are it's massive. It's one of his favorite things to do. So that's a big part of it. And we'll be in Charlotte for Christmas this year. But
that's right. Yes, you will. That's fantastic.
How about you?
So ours are kind of evolving. You know what I mean? Now that I've got 2 girls, 2 months old, 2 years old and 7 months old. So we're just kind of like really scratching that surface. But one that I've always loved, like my wife and I, the 5 years that we were married before we started having kids, we would on Christmas Day we would make brunch and watch Goodfellas. Okay, that was our tradition, and we've now morphed that to now with the girls. We put the girls down and we watch Die Hard in the evening because it's tough to watch Goodfellas in the evening. It's like a 3-hour movie. All right. I mean, that's a late night. So we've morphed it into get the girls down, pour something cold to drink, and watch Die Hard in the evening. But you'll like this, Jed. I'm starting a new Christmas tradition, hopefully. Christmas Eve, I'm doing prime rib this year for the first time ever. We're doing a prime rib dinner. I'm doing the pan gravy. I'm doing the horseradish aioli. I'm doing it up, homemade mashed potatoes, broccoli, and green beans. So hopefully that'll be Say that again?
How strong is the horseradish?
Pretty strong because my dad and I are the only ones who ever have any of it. So
I always say the horseradish is best when it borderline knocks you unconscious. I mean,
it's got to clear your sinuses out and all that good stuff. Yeah.
I love it.
I think we got a new tradition, hopefully, of Christmas Eve prime rib. One that it's not quite Whoville roast beast, but I think it'll stick. I think it'll stay. Okay, last one for you. I'm gonna put you on the spot here a little bit, and I'll answer first on this one just to give you a second to think about it. Your 2024 Christmas wish for West Virginia University athletics. You know, you can go football specifically. You can go bigger overall, whatever you want to do. Like I said, I'll give you a second to think about this one. But mine's real simple, Jed. It's just the continued boom of the Country Roads Trust. You know, like it's such a big deal in this new world order that is college football to have those strong collectives. And I think I think we have one that's ahead of the curve in a lot of ways. I think we're on our way to building one with a very strong foundation here in its first couple years. I love how Ren Baker has embraced that early on in his tenure at WVU. So that's my Christmas wish for WVU athletics. Nothing crazy. But just actually maybe for all the voodoo around the basketball program to finally stop, please, dear God. But just for overall the continued growth and support and and progression of the Country Roads Trust.
Poor Josh Eilert. I mean, come on, man.
My goodness,
come
man.
on, right?
Finally
But,
get your
that's a
waiver
good
guys back, and then Jesse Edwards fractures his wrist and he's out for a
come on,
month.
man.
You get Raekwon Battle back, but he misses his first game with the flu. Like, it's just incredible.
So let me tie a couple together. There's another quasi tradition that I didn't mention. We spend a weekend in Pittsburgh Christmas shopping, and a lot of times what we like to do is it's the weekend of December 10th ish, because that's when the Steel City Con is. We're a family full of sci-fi and comic book geeks, so
Yep.
they bring all these B-level celebrities in. And this year, actually, because we don't really plan it, it's kind of impromptu. We just show up and buy the tickets and go in.
Sure.
Well, this was the first time ever it was sold out. We couldn't get in. So we showed up and couldn't get in. It was so we're like, wow, this is getting too big for us, But I mean, you'll see everybody from Ralph Mouth to Carmen Electra. I mean, it's
Sure.
Oscar from The Office.
John Bernthal's been there in the past. Yeah.
Oh, they had the station wagon from the Griswold movies. It's great, but it's part of our Christmas shopping weekend in Pittsburgh. Well, I'm hoping that next year we have to pivot, adjust, and do a different weekend in Pittsburgh, because I hope to be in Jerry World that weekend next year. That's what I'm hoping for the
that's a
Big
great
12
one.
Conference
Dang
Championship.
it, I love
game.
that one. All right, can I redo my answer? Can we cut that from and I'll say the same thing, and I'll say it first to make it seem cooler. No, that's a fantastic answer. That's a great answer. Cheers to that one. I'm with you on that one. And it's funny, how like every year when the Steelers schedule comes out for my job, it's like I look at it through the lens of how does this affect my WVU games and everything, right?
Yeah.
And obviously number one on that list still for me is to be able to go to the backyard brawl, right? Just that I'm not traveling on the Saturday to Houston, Texas or Minnesota or whatever on the day of the backyard brawl. Because I've only missed one backyard brawl game since I was 7 years old. But the second one is going to be, man, Jed, I would love it if like the Steelers ended up playing on a Thursday or a Monday that week of the Big 12 championship game, so that if the Mountaineers do find themselves at Jerry World, I can find myself at Jerry World as well too. So
imagine if it's a Thursday in Dallas.
That's a great one. Even better, and then I'll just stay and keep the party going. Yeah, the Steelers.
Exactly.
The Steelers do, and what sucks is the Steelers do play the Cowboys next year, but it's slated to be in Pittsburgh, not in Dallas, or else that would have been the dream scenario.
Absolutely.
Getting to do those back-to-back days or something like that would be fantastic. But I love that. That'll be fun. Let us know in the comments. Let us know your traditions, any of those that you want to throw out there that I posed, or your WV. I'd be very interested to know people's WVU wish for a new year, Christmas wish for a new year. So let us know those as well too. For Big O, and as always, a thank you to our producer Skylar Callahan. I am Wesley Euler with the signal caller Jed Drenning, and the one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast. We're also going to ask you for one or two more things right now, okay? That's to have a very Merry Christmas. And like I said, if you're listening to this podcast while you're out traveling over the holidays, near or far, 10 minutes down the road or maybe a few hours crossing state lines, make sure you're staying safe out there. And safe travels. Enjoy the holidays. Enjoy the family. And Jed, I always like to say with these things too, I know the holidays for a lot of people are rough. Whether for losses that you've experienced, going through the holidays for the first time without somebody significant in your life, whether it's you didn't come from families where holidays were a celebrated thing, maybe it's not always been easy for you, whatever the case may be. I just always like to say that for those people too. Hold on tight because it goes quick. That's the gift and the curse of Christmas. If you love it and you look forward to it all year, hold on tight because it goes quick. If you're somebody who doesn't look forward to this time of year, hey, just hold on tight. It goes quick.
Well said. That's a great point. I was thinking of a friend who we lost this year, just a couple of days ago about that very thing, and I was thinking of his family. So I'm glad you said that.
So that's how we'll end this. Merry Christmas. Beat the hell out of North Carolina. Let's go get that 9th win. Take care, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon. As always, you've been In the Gun.